made of ebony, and that's a really hard wood, but we're going to have to true that and make it flat in at least 3 surfaces anyway. So we use our plane to do that, or the roughest work anyway, and if you can't finish it with the plane, then do that with 80 grit sandpaper, that's just as fine. Let's see, we use a shooting board, so that's just this board here with a small piece of wood screwed to the bottom, so it stays like that, sort of attached behind the workbench. And then I've used 3 wood stops to stop the fretboard from moving. Actually, you can do with 1 or 2, but I like to use 3, so it's really nice and tight. See, I've prepared this, so I'm going to hammer these down. So, now, here we go. So once you have one side flat and true, flip the fretboard over and do the other side. I was lucky with this fretboard. It well, it sort of flattened and straightened itself. It's now 6.5 millimeters thick, so I didn't have too much work on this one. Yeah, 6.5, so a little over a quarter inch. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to make a 90-degree angle. So the top surface and the bottom surface are parallel and flat, and now I'm going to true one of the sides. You don't have to do both, but just one of the sides, and it has to be straight and 90 degrees to both the top and bottom side. So I have here 2 pieces of wood, and the fretboard goes between those 2, and I clamp it in the vise. Note that the wood is shorter than the fretboard. That enables me to check on 2 ends whether the side is perpendicular to the surfaces. Not very, no, and also it's probably not very straight, not even close. So I'm going to take my jointer plane and see if I can maybe improve. Draw your center line by marking the same distance at 2 points from the straight line, from the straight side of the fretboard, and connect those 2 lines. And then clamp the ruler to the ebony and mark your fret positions. They should be in your drawing, but you can find them on the internet. Or by dividing your scale length by 17.187, which gives you the position of the first fret, and you subtract that number from the scale length and divide that by 17.187, and that gives you the distance between the first and second fret, and so on. And the 12th fret should be exactly half the scale length, so that's a good way to check. If you don't have a miter box, then you can take a straight piece of wood, which is a square on one side, and you hold the straight side of your fretboard against that, and then with your fret saw you cut the fret slots, maybe clamp it at each position. Ebony is a pretty hard wood, so it might help to lubricate the saw, and I don't cut too deep, just a hair more than the tang depth of the fret will do. There we are, and now it's time to taper the fretboard and we can cut the frets. So mark the nut width, which in my case is 52 millimeters. At the 12th fret, it's 10 millimeters more than at the nut, so it's 62 here. To taper the fretboard, you can maybe saw along this line first. I don't think I'll bother in this case because it's really not that much and it's very easy to take off with the plane. So I'll go straight to planing. Maybe if you have a very wide fretboard, then you'll want to use a saw first. This line has to be straight and perpendicular to the surfaces of the fretboard again. So we take out our straight edge and square and make sure that it's straight, and that's because it determines how well, well, partially how well the instrument plays. So it's pretty important that it's flat and true. And as you can see, because I'm going to taper my fretboard, I'll start at the nut and do one pass like this, then I'll take a longer pass, an even longer pass, and that way I touch this part here every time, and this and not so often, so it sort of tapers itself. If you don't have pre-cut fret wire, you probably have lengths like these. I use 1 millimeter high and 2 millimeter wide fret wire, and I have this little block of wood with holes drilled into it so I don't forget which one's which when I'm cutting it. So I take my pliers and with 1 or 2 millimeter extra I cut them. Now we're tapping the frets in. If you want to put dots in the side maybe for orientation, now's a good time to do it. And otherwise get out your hammer and let's tap. I use one of these dead blow hammers, but you can use a nylon hammer just as well. Take out your fret, place it in there and gently tap it. And there you go. Repeat. And that's that. It's time to chamfer the edges of the frets now. So we use our flat file to do that, and then we'll round them off. Maybe you have a special round file for that, like I do, or maybe you just have a small square file with which you can round them off just as easily. If they stick out a lot, then maybe you'll want to cut them off first with the pliers. And if you don't trust the environment you're in, you may want to run a drop of super glue under each fret. So let's see how the fretboard looks on the guitar. I have marked the center line here, and I have a dummy nut here which I slide right against the headstock veneer, and now I put my fretboard against that, like so, and with a ruler and a pencil I mark right at the tail. I put my ruler against the treble side of the fretboard, and then I put a little line there, and do the same on the bass side. Be careful not to move the fretboard while you do that. And then measure, and the two should be equidistant from the center line, which they are, so that's good. You can afford maybe 1 or 2 millimeters of play there. That shouldn't be a problem later. Now I'm going to cut off the excess material. For now I just do a straight line, and then later I'll make it round. So I've cut this end off of the fretboard, and now I'm going to put it back in exactly the same place that it was before, like so. And then from the inside of the guitar, and using the sound hole as a guide, I can mark the line on the bottom side of the fretboard. There we are. And now I can cut this part off with a fret saw, and then we can actually glue the fretboard onto the guitar, and if there's any excess material later we can remove that with a round file. I've rounded off the end of the fretboard, and it's now the same diameter as the sound hole, and I've also used a spruce filler piece to fill the gap between the two ends of the rosette, because that wasn't completely closed. There was a gap there, so I filled that up with some spruce. Also, I've cleaned or vacuum cleaned the neck, so any wood dust that might be there doesn't affect the joint of the fretboard being glued to the neck. And I've cleaned the bottom side of the fretboard with some naphtha. And now I'm going to put my nut in place and put glue on the neck. And in keeping with Ramirez's method, we don't put glue right to the sides of the fretboard, but we only do the center, and that gives the fretboard some room to shrink and dilate as humidity changes. Do a dry setup, by the way. Let the glue dry for at least a couple of hours, overnight preferably, and well, we're getting closer to the guitar now. In the next video we'll be shaping the neck.